As a credit expert with over 15 years of experience analyzing financial patterns and counseling thousands of clients through their darkest monetary moments, I thought I had seen everything. I'd witnessed families destroyed by hidden debt, watched brilliant entrepreneurs crumble under the weight of miscalculated risks, and helped countless individuals rebuild their financial lives from absolute zero. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I discovered in the case files that landed on my desk that cold October morning. For the past decade, I've served as the lead credit consultant for Morrison Financial Recovery, one of the most respected credit repair firms on the East Coast. My colleagues often joke that I can smell a credit disaster from 3 states away, and honestly, they're not wrong. I've developed an almost supernatural ability to spot the warning signs that precede financial catastrophe. That particular Tuesday started like any other. I arrived at my office at 7:30 sharp, armed with my usual extra-large coffee and a stack of new client files that needed immediate attention. The morning sun streamed through my corner office windows, casting long shadows across the mahogany desk that had belonged to my mentor, the late doctor, Elizabeth Morrison, who founded this firm 30 years ago. Her photograph still sits in the corner of my desk, a constant reminder of the responsibility I carry not just to my clients, but to the integrity of our profession. I was halfway through reviewing a standard bankruptcy case when my assistant, Marcus, knocked on my door with an expression I'd never seen before, a mixture of confusion, concern, and something that looked almost like fear. "Dr. Chen," he said, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "we've got something unusual here." 3 separate clients, completely unconnected, all experiencing the same bizarre credit phenomenon. Their scores are plummeting, but the pattern doesn't match anything in our database. Marcus had been with our firm for 8 years. He'd seen everything from identity theft rings to elaborate financial fraud schemes. For him to be rattled meant we were dealing with something genuinely unprecedented. "Show me," I said, pushing aside the bankruptcy file and gesturing for him to take a seat. He placed 3 thick manila folders on my desk. Jennifer Walsh, a 34-year-old marketing executive from Connecticut. Michael Rodriguez, 41, owns a small construction company in New Jersey. And Eleanor Fitzgerald, 67, retired teacher from upstate New York. On paper, they have nothing in common. Different ages, different occupations, different geographic locations, different financial institutions. I opened the first file. Jennifer Walsh stared back at me from her driver's license photo. Young, professional-looking, with the kind of confident smile that suggested someone who had her life together. Her credit report, however, told a different story. Her score dropped 247 points in 6 months, Marcus continued, leaning forward, from 782 to 535. But here's the thing. She never missed a payment. Not once. Her payment history shows a perfect record of on-time payments for every single account. I frowned, scanning the credit report more carefully. In 15 years of practice, I'd never seen a score drop so dramatically without a clear cause. Late payments, defaults, bankruptcies, maxed-out credit cards, these were the usual culprits. But Jennifer's report showed none of these red flags. "What about utilization?" I asked, looking for the next most common cause of score drops. "That's where it gets weird," Marcus said. "Her utilization rate is actually excellent, under 10% across all accounts. Debt-to-income ratio is healthy. No new hard inquiries, no derogatory marks. By every conventional metric, her credit should be improving, not deteriorating." I set down Jennifer's file and picked up the second one. Michael Rodriguez, a weathered-looking man with kind eyes and calloused hands, faced an identical situation. His score had plummeted 231 points over the same 6-month period, despite maintaining perfect payment habits and low utilization rates. Eleanor Fitzgerald's file was the most heartbreaking. This grandmother of 5 had spent decades building pristine credit, only to watch her score collapse from 798 to 501 in a matter of months. The confusion and distress in her handwritten note to our firm was palpable. I don't understand what I did wrong. I've never been late with a payment in my entire life. Have you contacted the credit bureaus? I asked, though I suspected Marcus had already exhausted the standard channels. Multiple times. Experian, Equifax, TransUnion, they all insist their calculations are correct. They claim there are no errors in the reports, no fraudulent accounts, no system malfunctions. According to them, these scores accurately reflect the client's creditworthiness. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing through possibilities. In my experience, credit bureaus weren't infallible, but they were consistent. Their algorithms, while complex, followed predictable patterns. For 3 separate individuals to experience identical anomalies suggested either a systemic error or something far more troubling. When did these score drops begin? I asked. Marcus consulted his notes. Jennifer's decline started in March, Michael's in early April, Eleanor's in late April. All of them contacted us within the past 2 weeks because their mortgage applications were denied. A pattern was emerging, though I couldn't yet see its full shape. I spent the rest of the morning diving deep into each file, cross-referencing payment histories, account types, and credit utilization patterns. By lunch, I had filled 3 legal pads with notes and observations, but I was no closer to understanding what had caused these unprecedented credit catastrophes. That afternoon, I decided to do something I rarely did anymore: make personal calls to each client. Sometimes the human element revealed details that didn't show up in paperwork. Jennifer answered on the first ring, her voice tense with worry. "Dr. Chen, thank God you called. I've been checking my credit score obsessively, and it just keeps getting worse. I don't know what to do." "Jennifer, I need you to walk me through your payment habits over the past year," I said. "Everything. Credit cards, utilities, mortgage, student loans, everything. I pay everything on time," she insisted. "I've got automatic payments set up for all my major bills. I get paid on the 15th of each month, and I make sure everything is paid by the 20th at the latest." "What about your credit card specifically? How do you handle those payments?" There was a slight pause. "Well, I pay them off completely every month. I never carry a balance." This was exactly what responsible credit users should do, so her answer only deepened the mystery. I asked a few more questions about her payment timing and amounts, but nothing stood out as problematic. My conversation with Michael yielded similar results. He was meticulous about his finances, keeping detailed spreadsheets of every expense and payment. Like Jennifer, he paid his credit cards in full every month and had never missed a due date. Eleanor's call was the most emotional. This elderly woman, who had raised 5 children and managed a household budget for decades, was devastated by her score's collapse. "Dr. Chen, I've been using credit cards since 1987, and I've never, not once, paid less than the full balance." By the end of that day, I was more puzzled than ever. 3 responsible consumers, all exhibiting textbook good credit behavior, all experiencing catastrophic score drops. There had to be a connection I wasn't seeing. That evening, I stayed late at the office, surrounded by credit reports, payment histories, and financial statements. I ordered Chinese takeout and settled in for a long night of analysis. Something was hiding in these numbers, and I was determined to find it. Around midnight, while reviewing Jennifer's credit card statements for the 3rd time, I noticed something odd. Her payment dates were remarkably consistent, always on the 18th of each month, always for the full statement balance. But when I cross-referenced these dates with her credit report, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The credit card companies were reporting her balances to the credit bureaus before her payments were processed. I quickly pulled up Michael's and Eleanor's files, my hands trembling slightly as I traced their payment patterns. The same thing. payments made consistently on specific dates each month. But the credit bureaus were receiving balance information before those payments cleared. This meant that even though all three clients were paying their balances in full every month, the credit reporting agencies were seeing them as carrying high balances month after month. From the bureau's perspective, these responsible consumers appeared to be maxing out their credit cards and maintaining dangerously high utilization rates. But this still didn't explain the severity of their score drops. High utilization would certainly damage credit scores, but not to the extent these three were experiencing. There had to be another factor at play. I spent the next hour digging deeper into the timing patterns, and that's when I discovered something that would haunt me for months to come. The problem wasn't just that balances were being reported before payments cleared. It was far worse than that. Each of these clients had fallen into what I would later term the payment timing trap, a phenomenon so insidious that it was slowly destroying their creditworthiness while they remained completely unaware of the damage being done. Here's what was happening. Jennifer, Michael, and Eleanor were all making their payments after their credit card companies reported their balances to the credit bureaus. This created a cascading effect where their utilization rates appeared to climb month after month, even though they never carried actual debt. But the real killer was something called balance chasing, a term I coined to describe what happened next. As their credit scores dropped due to artificially inflated utilization rates, their credit card companies began reducing their credit limits. Lower limits meant that even their normal monthly spending appeared to represent higher utilization percentages, creating a vicious cycle of declining scores and shrinking available credit. Jennifer's case was the most extreme example. She had been using her primary credit card for business expenses, charging approximately $4,000 per month for client dinners, travel, and office supplies. She always paid the full balance on the 18th of each month, but her credit card company reported balances to the bureaus on the 15th. When her score began dropping due to the apparent high utilization, her credit card company reduced her limit from $10,000 to $8,000, then to $6,000, and finally to $5,000. By the time I reviewed her case, she was appearing to use 80% of her available credit each month, even though she never carried a balance. The psychological impact on these clients was devastating. They had done everything right, paid on time, avoided debt, managed their finances responsibly. Yet they were being punished by a system that was fundamentally misinterpreting their behavior. Over the following days, I conducted extensive research into credit reporting timelines and discovered that this problem was far more widespread than these three isolated cases. Millions of Americans were potentially falling into the same trap, unknowingly destroying their credit scores through a payment habit that should have been helping them. The credit card industry's reporting practices varied widely. Some companies reported to bureaus on specific dates each month. Others reported when statements closed, and still others used seemingly random timing. For consumers who paid their balances in full each month, the timing of these reports could mean the difference between excellent credit and financial disaster. I decided to dig deeper into the industry practices, reaching out to contacts I had developed over the years at various financial institutions. What I learned was both shocking and deeply troubling. Sarah Martinez, a former executive at one of the largest credit card companies in the country, agreed to meet with me off the record at a small cafe in downtown Philadelphia. She had left her position 2 years earlier, citing ethical concerns about industry practices. "Dr. Chen," she said, stirring her coffee nervously, "what you've discovered is just the tip of the iceberg. The credit card companies know exactly what they're doing. They deliberately report balances at times when they'll appear highest because it gives them leverage to reduce credit limits and increase interest rates." "But these customers are paying their balances in full," I protested. "They're not costing the companies any money in terms of default risk." Sarah laughed bitterly. "That's exactly why they're targeted. Customers who pay their balances in full every month are called deadbeats in the industry because they don't generate interest income. By manipulating when balances are reported, companies can push these customers into the category of high-risk borrowers, which justifies higher fees and lower credit limits. This revelation was staggering. The very consumers who were managing their credit most responsibly were being systematically penalized by an industry that profited from debt and financial distress. How widespread is this practice? I asked. More common than you'd think, Sarah replied. Not every company does it deliberately, but enough do that it's become a significant industry trend. The credit bureaus don't care about the timing. They just record whatever data they receive. As long as the information is technically accurate at the moment it's reported, they consider it valid. I left that meeting feeling sick to my stomach. For years, I had been advising clients to pay their credit card balances in full each month, believing this was the gold standard of responsible credit use. Now I was learning that this advice, while financially sound, could be devastating to credit scores if not executed with precise timing. When I returned to my office, I immediately called Jennifer, Michael, and Eleanor to explain what I had discovered. Their reactions ranged from shock to outrage to despair. So you're telling me that paying my bills on time and in full has been destroying my credit? Jennifer asked, her voice shaking with anger. How is that possible? The system is designed to benefit creditors, not consumers, I explained. Your payment behavior is exemplary, but the timing of when that behavior is reported to credit bureaus has been working against you. Michael was more philosophical about the revelation. I've been in construction for 20 years, Dr. Chen. I've seen plenty of systems that are rigged against the working man. I guess I shouldn't be surprised the credit reporting is another one. Eleanor's response was the most heartbreaking. I'm 67 years old, she said quietly. I don't have time to rebuild my credit. My husband and I saved for decades to buy our retirement home, and now the bank won't approve our mortgage because of this mistake. That night, I made a decision that would change the course of my career. I was going to expose this practice and help as many people as possible avoid falling into the same trap. I began by conducting a comprehensive analysis of credit reporting patterns across multiple card issuers. Working with a team of data analysts, I examined thousands of credit reports to identify common patterns in how and when balances were reported. What we found was deeply disturbing. Nearly 40% of major credit card companies were reporting customer balances in ways that artificially inflated utilization rates for customers who paid their balances in full each month. The practice was so prevalent that we estimated it was affecting the credit scores of over 15 million Americans. The financial implications were staggering. Customers caught on this trap were being charged higher interest rates on mortgages, auto loans, and other forms of credit. Many were being denied loans entirely, despite having excellent payment histories and low actual debt levels. I decided to write a comprehensive report documenting my findings, but I knew that wouldn't be enough. The people being harmed by this practice needed immediate help, not academic analysis. Working with my team at Morrison Financial Recovery, I developed a strategy for helping clients escape the payment timing trap. The solution was counterintuitive and went against decades of conventional financial wisdom. Instead of paying credit card balances in full each month, we began advising certain clients to leave small balances on their cards until after the reporting date, then pay them off before interest charges accrued. This approach ensured the credit bureaus would see low but non-zero utilization rates, which actually scored better than zero utilization in most credit scoring models. The results were immediate and dramatic. Jennifer's credit score began recovering within 2 months of implementing our new payment strategy. Michael saw a 150-point increase in his score over 4 months. Eleanor, despite her age and the urgency of her situation, managed to improve her score enough to qualify for her retirement home mortgage. But these individual successes, while gratifying, didn't address the systemic problem. Millions of Americans were still unknowingly destroying their credit through what they believed was responsible behavior. I decided to take my findings public, starting with a presentation to the National Association of Credit Counselors. The response was explosive. Credit counselors from across the country shared similar stories of clients whose scores had inexplicably dropped despite excellent payment behavior. Dr. James Morrison, Elizabeth's son and the current CEO of our firm, was initially concerned about the potential backlash from the credit card industry. "Sarah," he warned, "you're taking on some very powerful interests here. Are you sure you want to make enemies of the companies that essentially control access to credit in this country?" But I couldn't stay silent. Every day that passed meant more consumers falling into the same trap that had ensnared Jennifer, Michael, and Eleanor. I began reaching out to financial journalists, consumer advocacy groups, and even congressional staffers who worked on banking committee issues. The response was mixed. Some were intrigued by the implications of my research, while others seemed reluctant to challenge an industry with such significant lobbying power. My breakthrough came when I connected with Lisa Thompson, an investigative reporter for the Washington Financial Tribune. Lisa had been covering predatory lending practices for years and immediately grasped the significance of what I had uncovered. "Dr. Chen," she said during our first phone call, "this is exactly the kind of systemic abuse that destroys families' financial futures. How many people are we talking about?" "Based on our analysis, potentially 15 million Americans are being affected by credit reporting timing issues," I replied. "And that's a conservative estimate. The actual number could be much higher." Lisa spent 3 weeks verifying my research, interviewing additional victims, and reaching out to credit card companies for comment. Most companies either declined to comment or provided boilerplate responses about following industry-standard reporting practices. When her story was published, the response was immediate and overwhelming. The Tribune's website crashed within hours due to traffic volume, and my office phone didn't stop ringing for 3 days straight. Consumers from across the country called to share their own stories of unexplained credit score drops. Many had been struggling for months or years to understand why their scores were declining despite responsible financial behavior. Finally, they had an explanation. But not everyone was pleased with the attention. Within a week of the article's publication, I received a call from the legal department of one of the largest credit card companies in the country. "Dr. Chen," the attorney said, his voice professionally cordial but unmistakably threatening, "we understand you've been making certain claims about industry reporting practices. We want to ensure you understand the potential legal implications of spreading misinformation about established business practices." "I'm not spreading misinformation," I replied calmly. "I'm reporting documented patterns of behavior that are harming consumers." "That's your interpretation," he said. "But we would strongly advise you to be more careful about the accusations you're making. False statements about our reporting practices could be considered defamatory." The call left me shaken, but more determined than ever. The fact that they were resorting to legal intimidation suggested I had struck a nerve. Over the following months, I worked with consumer advocacy groups to develop educational materials about payment timing strategies. We created simple guides that explained how to determine when credit card companies reported balances to bureaus and how to time payments to optimize credit scores. The response was gratifying, but also highlighted the absurdity of the situation. Consumers were having to game the system, strategically timing their payments and managing their balances, just to avoid being penalized for responsible financial behavior. Meanwhile, Jennifer, Michael, and Eleanor had become inadvertent advocates for credit reporting reform. Their stories, featured in multiple media outlets, put human faces on what could otherwise be seen as an abstract policy issue. Jennifer testified before a congressional subcommittee on consumer protection, describing how the payment timing trap had nearly cost her a promotion at work when her employer ran a credit check as part of a background review for increased responsibilities. "Congresswoman Rodriguez," she said, addressing the subcommittee chairwoman, "I did everything I was supposed to do. I paid my bills on time, lived within my means, and avoided debt. Yet I was treated by the credit system as if I were a financial deadbeat. This isn't just unfair, it's economically destructive. Michael's story resonated particularly strongly with small business owners. His construction company had nearly lost a major contract when bonding companies balked at his seemingly poor credit score. Only our intervention and documentation of his actual payment history convinced the bonding company to approve his application. Eleanor's case became a rallying cry for senior advocacy groups. The idea that a 67-year-old woman with decades of perfect credit history could be denied a mortgage due to credit reporting timing issues struck many as fundamentally unjust. "I worked as a teacher for 42 years, she told a gathering of the AARP. "I taught children about responsibility, about doing the right thing, about working hard and paying your debts. Now I'm learning that the very system I taught them to respect has been working against people like me all along." As public attention grew, several state attorneys general began investigating credit reporting practices within their jurisdictions. The Attorney General of California announced a formal inquiry into whether credit card companies were engaging in deceptive practices by reporting balances in ways that artificially inflated customer risk profiles. But progress was slow, and the human costs continued to mount. Every week brought new stories of families affected by the payment timing trap, couples denied mortgages, students unable to secure education loans, entrepreneurs blocked from accessing business credit. One case that particularly haunted me was that of David and Maria Santos, a young couple from Texas, who had been trying to buy their first home for 2 years. Both had maintained perfect payment records and had saved diligently for a down payment. But their credit scores had mysteriously declined just as they entered the housing market. "Dr. Chen," Maria said during our phone consultation, tears evident in her voice, "we've been living with my parents for 3 years while we saved money. We finally have enough for a down payment, and now the bank says our credit isn't good enough. Our kids ask when we're going to have our own house, and we don't know what to tell them." David had been caught in the same payment timing trap as my original 3 clients. His responsible habit of paying credit card balances in full each month was being reported as high utilization, causing his score to drop by nearly 200 points over 18 months. Working with the Santos family, we implemented our payment timing strategy, but the damage to their immediate home buying plans was already done. They would need months to rebuild their scores to mortgage qualifying levels, forcing them to delay their home ownership dreams yet again. Stories like the Santos families reinforced my belief that individual solutions, while important, weren't enough. We needed systemic change to prevent millions of other families from falling into the same trap. I began working with a coalition of consumer advocacy groups to petition the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, CFPB, to investigate credit reporting timing practices. Our petition, supported by detailed research and hundreds of consumer stories, called for new regulations requiring more transparent and consistent reporting standards. The CFPB's initial response was cautious but encouraging. A senior official agreed to meet with our coalition to discuss the scope and potential impact of the problem. "Dr. Chen," said Deputy Director Amanda Walsh during our meeting in Washington, "your research suggests a significant market failure in credit reporting. However, we need to balance consumer protection with industry flexibility. What specific regulatory changes would you recommend?" I had prepared extensively for this question. "Director Walsh, we're proposing 3 key changes. First, require credit card companies to disclose their reporting schedules to customers. Second, mandate that companies report both current balances and previous month's payment amounts. Third, establish standardized reporting dates across the industry to eliminate timing arbitrage." The CFPB team took detailed notes but made no immediate commitments. Regulatory change, I knew, could take years even under the best circumstances. In the meantime, I continued working with individual clients and developing resources to help consumers navigate the current system. Our firm launched a free online calculator that helped people determine optimal payment timing based on their specific credit card company's reporting practices. The tool was downloaded over 100,000 times in its first month, suggesting the scope of demand for this information. Comments from users were both gratifying and heartbreaking. Many expressed relief at finally understanding why their credit scores had been declining. while others shared stories of opportunities lost due to inexplicably poor credit. One comment particularly stood out. "I'm a financial advisor, and I've been giving my clients the wrong advice for 20 years. I told them to pay their credit cards in full every month, thinking it was the best strategy. Now I realize I may have inadvertently hurt some of their credit scores. Thank you for opening my eyes to this problem." This comment highlighted another troubling aspect of the situation. Even financial professionals were unaware of the payment timing trap. If experts in the field didn't understand these nuances, how could average consumers be expected to navigate them successfully? I began conducting training seminars for financial advisors, credit counselors, and mortgage brokers, teaching them to recognize the signs of payment timing issues and how to help their clients address them. During one seminar in Chicago, a mortgage broker named Tom Patterson shared a story that exemplified the industry-wide lack of awareness about this issue. "Last month I had a client, a surgeon, incredibly responsible with money, whose mortgage application was denied due to a low credit score," Tom said. "I couldn't understand it, because his income was excellent and he had no debt. After hearing your presentation, I realized he was probably caught in this payment timing trap. I called him, and sure enough, he was paying his credit cards in full every month, but after the reporting dates." Tom had worked with the surgeon to adjust his payment timing, and within 3 months the doctor's score had improved enough to qualify for his mortgage. "The crazy thing is," Tom continued, "this guy is a neurosurgeon. He literally saves lives for a living, but the credit system was treating him like a financial risk because of when he paid his bills." As word spread about the payment timing trap, I began receiving calls from reporters, academics, and policy experts who wanted to understand the broader implications of the phenomenon. Many were particularly interested in the racial and economic equity aspects of the issue. Dr. Angela Washington, a researcher at Howard University who studied racial disparities in credit access, pointed out that the payment timing trap could disproportionately affect minority communities and first-generation credit users who were less likely to have access to sophisticated financial advice. "Dr. Chen," she said during a conference call with several researchers, "your findings suggest that even when minority families do everything, right, pay their bills on time, avoid debt, live within their means, they can still be systematically disadvantaged by credit reporting practices they don't understand. This could be contributing to persistent wealth gaps." This perspective added another layer of urgency to my work. The payment timing trap wasn't just harming individual consumers. It was potentially exacerbating existing inequalities in access to credit and wealth-building opportunities. I began collaborating with Dr. Washington and other researchers to quantify the demographic impact of payment timing issues. Our preliminary analysis suggested that first-generation credit users and lower-income consumers were indeed more likely to fall into the trap, partly because they were less likely to have access to sophisticated financial advice. As our research expanded, I also began documenting the long-term economic consequences of the payment timing trap. Consumers caught in the trap didn't just face immediate credit score drops. They often experienced cascading effects that could last for years. Take the case of Robert Kim, a 28-year-old software engineer from Seattle. Robert had been caught in the payment timing trap just as he was planning to start his own technology company. His declining credit score prevented him from accessing a business line of credit, forcing him to abandon his entrepreneurial plans and remain in traditional employment. "Dr. Chen," Robert told me during a phone consultation, "I had a great business plan, potential investors, and years of experience in the industry. But without access to credit, I couldn't take the risk of starting my own company. I'm making good money as an employee, but I lost the opportunity to build something of my own." Robert's story was repeated countless times across the country. Young entrepreneurs, growing families, and working professionals whose economic opportunities were constrained by credit reporting practices they didn't understand. The psychological impact was often as devastating as the economic consequences. Many clients described feeling betrayed by a financial system they had tried to navigate responsibly. Susan Martinez, a 35-year-old nurse from Phoenix, captured this sentiment perfectly. I did everything they tell you to do in personal finance classes. I paid my bills on time, lived below my means, avoided debt. But somehow I was still failing at credit. It made me feel like I was fundamentally bad with money, even though I knew I was being responsible. The worst part was not understanding why it was happening. Susan's experience highlighted the emotional toll of the payment timing trap. Consumers who prided themselves on financial responsibility were forced to confront credit scores that seemed to contradict their self-image and their actual financial behavior. Working with clients like Susan, I began to understand that rebuilding credit scores was only part of the solution. Many people also needed help rebuilding their confidence in the financial system and their own abilities to manage money effectively. This realization led me to develop a more holistic approach to credit counseling that addressed both the technical aspects of credit repair and the psychological impact of credit score damage. We began incorporating elements of financial therapy into our practice, helping clients process the emotional impact of their credit experiences. The response was overwhelmingly positive. Clients reported feeling more empowered and confident about their financial futures once they understood that their credit problems weren't due to personal failures, but to systemic issues in credit reporting. Jennifer Walsh, my original client, became a powerful example of this transformation. After rebuilding her credit score and understanding the root cause of her problems, she became an advocate for financial literacy education. Dr. Chen helped me realize that I wasn't bad with money. The system was working against me, Jennifer said during a financial literacy workshop she organized at her company. Once I understood what was really happening, I could take control and fix the problem. But more importantly, I could help other people avoid falling into the same trap. Michael Rodriguez had a similar transformation. His construction company began offering financial literacy workshops for his employees, focusing specifically on credit management and the importance of payment timing. A lot of my guys are just starting to build credit, Michael explained. They're young, working hard, trying to do right by their families. I don't want them to go through what I went through, wondering why their credit was getting worse, even though they were paying their bills. Eleanor Fitzgerald, despite her advanced age, became perhaps the most passionate advocate of all. She began speaking at senior centers and community groups, warning other retirees about payment timing traps and sharing strategies for maintaining good credit in retirement. I may be 67, but I'm not done learning, Eleanor said during one presentation, and I'm certainly not done fighting for what's right. If my experience can help even one other family avoid these problems, then something good will have come from this nightmare. The advocacy efforts of Jennifer, Michael, Eleanor, and dozens of other clients began to create a grassroots movement for credit reporting reform. But progress at the regulatory level remained frustratingly slow. Despite extensive documentation of the problem and growing public awareness, credit card companies continued their reporting practices largely unchanged. Some companies made minor adjustments, providing more detailed information about reporting dates or allowing customers to request different payment due dates to align with reporting schedules. But these changes were voluntary and limited in scope. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A class action lawsuit filed by a team of consumer protection attorneys in California alleged that several major credit card companies were engaging in deceptive practices by failing to disclose how their reporting practices could affect customer credit scores. The lawsuit drew on my research and the stories of clients like Jennifer, Michael, and Eleanor to argue that consumers were being systematically misled about the credit implications of their payment choices. Dr. Chen's research demonstrates that millions of Americans are being harmed by practices they don't understand and can't reasonably anticipate, said lead attorney Patricia Gonzalez during the lawsuit's announcement. Credit card companies have a responsibility to be transparent about how their business practices affect their customers' creditworthiness. The lawsuit immediately generated significant media attention and prompted several credit card companies to review their reporting practices. More importantly, it created legal and financial pressure for industry-wide changes that regulatory pressure alone had failed to achieve. Within 6 months of the lawsuit's filing, 3 major credit card companies announced changes to their reporting practices, including more transparent disclosure of reporting dates and options for customers to align their payment schedules with optimal reporting timing. The changes weren't perfect. They still placed the burden on consumers to understand and navigate complex timing requirements. But they represented the first meaningful industry acknowledgement that payment timing could unfairly impact credit scores. As these industry changes began to take effect, I started seeing fewer new cases of severe payment timing trap damage. Consumers who were aware of the issue could take steps to protect themselves, and companies were providing more information to help them do so. However, millions of Americans were still living with the credit score damage from years of unknowing participation in the payment timing trap. For these consumers, individual credit repair remained essential. Our firm expanded its services to address the growing demand for payment timing trap recovery. We developed specialized programs for different demographic groups: young professionals just starting their credit histories, families preparing to buy homes, seniors planning major purchases in retirement, and entrepreneurs seeking business credit. Each group faced unique challenges and required tailored approaches. Young professionals often had limited credit histories that made them more vulnerable to score swings, while families needed rapid score improvements to meet mortgage application deadlines. The entrepreneurship cases were particularly rewarding to work on. Many small business owners had been blocked from accessing capital due to personal credit issues stemming from payment timing traps. Helping them rebuild their scores often meant enabling them to pursue business opportunities that had been put on hold. Marcus Rivera, a 31-year-old chef from Miami, exemplified this impact. Marcus had planned to open his own restaurant but found himself unable to secure a business loan when his personal credit score dropped due to payment timing issues. "Dr. Chen, I knew every aspect of running a restaurant," Marcus explained during our initial consultation. "I had worked in kitchens for 12 years, saved money for equipment and initial inventory, and had a solid business plan. But when the bank pulled my credit, my score was so low, they wouldn't even consider my application." Working with Marcus, we implemented an aggressive credit rebuilding strategy that included optimizing payment timing across all his credit accounts, strategically managing utilization rates, and leveraging his previously excellent payment history. Within 8 months, Marcus's score had improved by over 200 points. He secured his business loan and opened Rivera's Kitchen, which became one of Miami's most popular neighborhood restaurants. "The crazy thing is," Marcus reflected a year after opening his restaurant, "my actual financial behavior never changed. I was always responsible with money. I just learned how to be responsible in a way that the credit system could recognize and reward." Marcus's story highlighted a troubling reality. Success in the modern economy often required not just responsible financial behavior, but sophisticated understanding of credit reporting nuances that most consumers couldn't reasonably be expected to possess. This insight drove me to expand my research into what I began calling credit literacy gaps, the disconnect between what consumers believed about credit management and what actually optimized their credit scores. The payment timing trap was just one manifestation of a broader problem. The credit system had become so complex that even well-intentioned, financially responsible consumers could inadvertently damage their creditworthiness. My team and I began documenting other credit literacy gaps beyond payment timing. We discovered that many consumers were unknowingly hurting their scores through practices that seemed logical, but were counterproductive in the context of credit scoring algorithms. For example, we found that consumers who closed old credit cards to clean up their credit reports were often inadvertently reducing their credit history length and increasing their utilization rates. Similarly, people who avoided credit cards entirely in an effort to stay debt-free were missing opportunities to build positive credit history. One of the most shocking discoveries was what we termed the zero balance penalty. Credit scoring algorithms, we learned, actually penalized consumers who consistently maintained zero balances across all their credit accounts. The algorithms interpreted zero utilization as a sign that the consumer wasn't actively using credit, which could indicate either financial distress or inexperience with credit management. This meant that the most financially conservative consumers, those who paid cash for everything and avoided debt entirely, were being systematically disadvantaged by credit scoring systems that were supposedly designed to measure creditworthiness. The case of Dr. Patricia Williams, a 45-year-old pediatrician from Denver, perfectly illustrated this phenomenon. Dr. Williams had spent years paying cash for major purchases, avoiding debt, and maintaining minimal credit card balances. She believed this approach demonstrated superior financial management. When she applied for a mortgage to buy a larger home for her growing family, she was shocked to learn that her credit score was only 620, barely above the threshold for conventional loan approval. "Dr. Chen," she said during our consultation, "I'm a physician. I make a six-figure income. I have substantial savings and no debt. How can my credit score be so low?" The answer lay in her well-intentioned but counterproductive approach to credit management. By avoiding credit usage entirely, Dr. Williams had failed to demonstrate active credit management skills to the scoring algorithms. Her credit reports showed old accounts with minimal activity, which the algorithms interpreted as potential signs of financial distress or inexperience. Working with Dr. Williams, we developed a strategy to demonstrate active but responsible credit usage. She began using her credit cards for routine monthly expenses like groceries and utilities, then paying the balances strategically to maintain low but non-zero utilization rates. Within 6 months, her credit score had improved by over 150 points. She qualified for an excellent mortgage rate and was able to purchase her dream home. But the experience left her frustrated with the opacity of the credit system. "I spend my days diagnosing complex medical conditions," she told me after closing on her house. But understanding credit scoring felt more challenging than medical school. There's something fundamentally wrong with a system that penalizes responsible financial behavior. Dr. Williams' experience reinforced my growing conviction that the credit system's complexity was not accidental. The more complex and opaque the system remained, the more likely consumers were to make costly mistakes that benefited creditors. This realization led me to begin investigating whether certain industry practices were deliberately designed to confuse consumers and generate additional revenue through suboptimal credit management. My research took on new urgency when I received a call from James Chen, an investigative journalist with the Financial Times, who had been following my work on payment timing traps. "Dr. Chen," he said, "I've been digging into credit card industry practices. And I think there's a much bigger story here than just payment timing. I've found evidence that some companies are deliberately designing their systems to confuse consumers about optimal credit management practices." James had obtained internal documents from a former credit card company executive who had grown uncomfortable with certain industry practices. The documents revealed strategies for maximizing revenue by encouraging suboptimal consumer behavior. One particularly damning memo discussed the benefits of credit confusion, describing how complex and contradictory credit management advice could lead consumers to make decisions that increased company profitability while harming their own credit scores. "The beauty of credit confusion," the memo stated, "is that consumers believe they're making responsible choices while actually engaging in behavior that justifies higher interest rates and lower credit limits. This allows us to maintain higher profitability margins while avoiding regulatory scrutiny, since technically, we're not forcing anyone to make poor decisions." Reading these documents made me physically ill. The memo described my clients, people like Jennifer, Michael, Eleanor, and Dr. Williams, as revenue opportunities rather than human beings deserving of fair treatment. James and I worked together to verify the authenticity of the documents and understand their broader implications. What we found was a systematic effort across multiple companies to profit from consumer confusion about credit management. The strategies included deliberately ambiguous payment due date communications, complex balance transfer offers designed to increase rather than decrease customer debt loads, and credit limit reduction programs that targeted customers with improving credit profiles to force them into higher utilization rates. Most relevant to my research was evidence of deliberate balance reporting timing manipulation. The documents showed that some companies had specifically analyzed the optimal timing for reporting customer balances to maximize the appearance of high utilization among customers who paid their balances in full. One analysis projected that manipulating reporting timing could increase revenue by 12% annually by justifying higher interest rates and fees for customers who would otherwise qualify for better terms. When James published his expose, the response was immediate and explosive. Congressional hearings were announced within days. Multiple state attorneys general launched investigations, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau indicated it would conduct a comprehensive review of credit card industry practices. But the human cost of these practices continued to mount while regulatory wheels turned slowly. Every day brought new stories of families harmed by credit confusion tactics. Lisa and Robert Thompson, a young couple from Oregon, contacted me after reading about the payment timing trap in James's article. They had been trying to buy their first home for 3 years, saving diligently and maintaining what they believed were excellent credit habits. Dr. Chen, Lisa said during our phone consultation, we read your article and realized we've been doing everything wrong. We thought we were being so responsible by paying our credit cards early every month and keeping our balances as low as possible. Now we find out that was actually hurting our credit scores. The Thompsons had fallen into multiple credit traps simultaneously. They were paying their credit cards too early in the month before normal charges had accumulated, leading to artificially low utilization rates that the scoring algorithms interpreted as inactivity. They had also closed several old credit cards to simplify their finances, unknowingly reducing their credit history length and increasing their utilization rates on remaining accounts. Most tragically, they had been just a few points away from qualifying for excellent mortgage rates for over 2 years. Had they understood optimal credit management timing, they could have purchased their home much earlier and avoided thousands of dollars in continued rent payments. We feel so stupid, Robert said. We're both college graduates. We thought we understood how credit worked, but apparently we understood the opposite of how it actually works. The Thompsons' experience captured the emotional impact of credit confusion tactics. Educated, responsible consumers were being made to feel incompetent by a system that was deliberately designed to be counterintuitive. Working with the Thompsons, we implemented a comprehensive credit optimization strategy. Within 10 months, both of their scores had improved enough to qualify for prime mortgage rates. They purchased their home and saved over $200,000 in interest payments over the life of their mortgage compared to what they would have paid with their previous scores. But their success came at a cost that extended beyond delayed home ownership. The 3 years of confusion and frustration had taken an emotional toll that was difficult to quantify but impossible to ignore. Even though we got our house and our credit is great now, Lisa reflected, there's part of me that will never trust the financial system again. How many other things don't work the way they claim to work? How many other ways are we being misled without knowing it? This loss of trust in financial institutions was a recurring theme among clients who had been caught in credit traps. Even after successfully rebuilding their credit scores, many remained suspicious of financial advice and pessimistic about the fairness of the credit system. The psychological impact extended beyond individual consumers to entire communities. In lower-income neighborhoods where access to sophisticated financial advice was limited, confusion about optimal credit management practices could perpetuate cycles of financial exclusion. I began working with community organizations to develop educational programs specifically designed to address credit literacy gaps in underserved communities. These programs focused on practical strategies for navigating credit systems rather than abstract financial concepts. One of the most successful programs was launched in partnership with the East Baltimore Community Development Corporation. We provided free credit counseling and education to residents of a neighborhood that had been particularly hard hit by the foreclosure crisis a decade earlier. Many residents were first-generation credit users or were rebuilding their credit after previous financial difficulties. Traditional financial literacy programs often assume baseline knowledge that these consumers didn't possess, making the information irrelevant or intimidating. Our program took a different approach, starting with the specific credit challenges facing community members and working backward to explain the underlying systems and strategies. We used real case studies from community members who had successfully improved their credit scores to demonstrate that improvement was possible. The program's most powerful element was its peer support component. Community members who had successfully navigated credit rebuilding served as mentors for others just beginning the process. Maria Santos, one of our early success stories, became a particularly effective mentor. Her journey from a 480 credit score to over 750 in 18 months inspired many other community members to seek help with their own credit challenges. I used to think credit was this mysterious thing that only rich people understood, Maria explained during a community workshop. Dr. Chen and her team showed me that it's really just a game with specific rules. Once you understand the rules, you can play to win instead of just hoping you don't lose. Maria's transformation from victim to advocate embodied the broader goal of our community education efforts. We weren't just trying to help individual consumers improve their credit scores. We were trying to build community capacity to resist and navigate credit system manipulation. The community program's success attracted attention from other cities facing similar challenges. We began receiving requests to replicate the program in Detroit, Cleveland, Phoenix, and dozens of other communities where credit challenges were limiting economic opportunity. Each new community taught us something different about the intersection of credit systems and local economic conditions. In Detroit, we learned about the unique challenges facing residents trying to rebuild credit after bankruptcy. In Phoenix, we discovered how the lingering effects of the foreclosure crisis were still impacting credit access a decade later. But in every community, we found the same fundamental problem: well-intentioned consumers being systematically disadvantaged by credit systems they didn't fully understand. As our community programs expanded, I also continued working with individual clients who had been caught in various credit traps. Each case taught me something new about the complexity and perversity of the credit system. One case that particularly stuck with me was that of Captain Sarah Mitchell, a 32-year-old Army officer who contacted me after being denied a VA home loan, despite exemplary military service and financial management.
Captain Mitchell had spent 8 years in the military, deploying multiple times to combat zones. During her deployments, she had arranged for automatic payments on all her accounts and had accumulated substantial savings due to combat pay exclusions and limited spending opportunities in theater. "Dr. Chen," she explained during our initial consultation, "I've been serving my country for 8 years. I've managed my money carefully, saved aggressively, and never missed a payment on anything. But somehow my credit score is so low that I can't even qualify for a VA loan. It feels like the system is punishing me for my military service."
Captain Mitchell's case was complicated by several factors unique to military service. Extended deployments had led to periods of minimal credit activity, which scoring algorithms interpreted as potential financial distress. Automatic payments had sometimes processed in ways that created suboptimal utilization timing. Most significantly, her responsible habit of paying down debt aggressively during deployments had reduced her credit utilization to levels that scoring algorithms interpreted as credit inexperience. The most frustrating aspect of Captain Mitchell's situation was that her financial behavior during military service had been objectively excellent. She had avoided debt, saved money, and maintained perfect payment records under challenging circumstances. Yet the credit system was treating her as a high-risk borrower. Working with Captain Mitchell required developing specialized strategies for military personnel, whose service creates unique credit management challenges. We worked with her to demonstrate active credit management while maintaining her financially conservative approach to debt. Within 12 months, Captain Mitchell's score had improved enough to qualify for a VA loan with excellent terms. She purchased a home near her new duty station and was able to begin building equity instead of paying rent. but her experience highlighted systemic problems with how credit scoring algorithms evaluated military service members. The same deployment rotations and financial discipline that made military personnel excellent credit risks were being interpreted by algorithms as warning signs. This realization led me to begin researching credit challenges facing other groups whose life circumstances didn't fit standard credit scoring assumptions: students, immigrants, seniors, people with irregular income, and others whose financial patterns deviated from traditional employment and spending models. Each group faced unique challenges that were often invisible to conventional credit counseling approaches. International students, for example, often had excellent financial backgrounds in their home countries, but no U.S. credit history. Freelancers and gig workers had irregular income patterns that confused credit scoring algorithms. Seniors on fixed incomes were often penalized for reduced credit activity, even when their financial situation was stable. My research into these specialized populations led to the development of tailored credit building strategies for each group. But it also reinforced my growing conviction that the fundamental problem was the credit system itself, not the consumers trying to navigate it. The credit scoring system had been designed for an economy and society that no longer existed, one where most people worked traditional full-time jobs for single employers, lived in the same communities for decades, and followed predictable financial patterns throughout their lives. Modern economic reality was far more complex and dynamic. People changed careers multiple times, moved frequently, worked multiple jobs, started businesses, dealt with irregular income, and managed financial lives that bore little resemblance to the assumptions underlying traditional credit scoring models. This mismatch between credit system assumptions and economic reality created opportunities for manipulation by institutions that understood the system's quirks and limitations. Companies could design products and policies that technically complied with regulations while taking advantage of consumers who couldn't reasonably be expected to understand all the system's nuances. The more I learned about credit system manipulation, the more convinced I became that comprehensive reform was necessary. Individual education and assistance, while important, couldn't address the fundamental unfairness of a system that penalized responsible behavior and rewarded gaming. My reform advocacy took on new urgency when I received a call from Senator Elizabeth Warren's office. The senator was preparing legislation to address predatory practices in the credit industry and wanted to discuss my research findings. The meeting took place in the senator's Washington office on a crisp November morning. Senator Warren, accompanied by several staff members and policy experts, listened intently as I presented my findings about payment timing traps, credit confusion tactics, and the broader challenges facing consumers trying to navigate modern credit systems. Dr. Chen, the senator said after my presentation, your research suggests that the credit system is fundamentally rigged against consumers who try to do the right thing. That's not just unfair, it's economically destructive. How do we fix this? I had prepared extensively for this question, drawing on years of research and client experience. Senator Warren, we need 3 fundamental changes. First, complete transparency in credit reporting and scoring practices. Consumers have a right to understand exactly how their actions will affect their credit scores. Second, standardization of reporting practices to eliminate timing arbitrage and other forms of manipulation. Third, algorithmic accountability. Credit scoring models should be required to justify how they measure actual creditworthiness rather than ability to generate profits for creditors. The senator's staff took detailed notes and asked probing questions about implementation challenges and industry resistance. They were particularly interested in the potential economic impact of reform, both the benefits to consumers and the cost to the credit industry. The credit industry will argue that these changes will increase their costs and reduce their ability to manage risk, noted one policy advisor. How do we respond to those concerns? The current system doesn't actually manage risk effectively, I replied. It manages profitability. Companies are making money by confusing consumers and manipulating credit scores, not by accurately assessing default risk. True risk assessment would actually be improved by more transparent and consistent practices. The meeting lasted over 2 hours and concluded with the senator's commitment to include credit reporting reform in her broader financial reform agenda. But translating research findings into effective legislation would require extensive additional work to anticipate industry objections and craft enforceable regulations. Meanwhile, the human cost of credit system manipulation continued to accumulate. Every week brought new stories of families harmed by practices that prioritized industry profits over consumer welfare. One story that particularly affected me was that of the Rodriguez family from New Mexico. Miguel Rodriguez, a veteran and construction worker, had been trying to refinance his mortgage to take advantage of lower interest rates. Despite never missing a payment in 15 years of home ownership, his credit score had declined due to payment timing issues, disqualifying him from refinancing. The difference in monthly payments between his current rate and the available refinancing rate was $340 per month, money that the Rodriguez family desperately needed for their daughter's medical treatments. Miguel's wife, Carmen, had been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, and their insurance didn't cover all her medications. "Dr. Chen," Miguel said during a particularly emotional phone call, "I've been paying this mortgage on time for 15 years. I've never been late, never missed a payment, never been in default. But somehow my credit isn't good enough to get a better rate on the same house. My wife needs medicine, and we're paying an extra $340 every month because of some timing issue I never knew existed." Working with the Rodriguez family, we were able to improve Miguel's credit score enough to qualify for refinancing within 8 months. The lower payments freed up money for Carmen's medical care and reduced the family's financial stress during an already challenging time. But 8 months was too long. Carmen's condition had worsened during the delay, and the family had been forced to skip some medications and treatments they couldn't afford with their higher mortgage payments. "We're grateful for your help, Dr. Chen," Carmen said after their refinancing was approved. "But I can't help wondering how many other families are out there struggling with the same problems we faced. How many people are being hurt by these practices every day?" Carmen's question haunted me. For every family we were able to help, how many others were suffering in silence, unaware that their financial problems had systemic rather than personal causes? This concern led me to expand my research into the aggregate economic impact of credit system manipulation. Working with a team of economists, we attempted to quantify the total cost to consumers of practices like payment timing traps and credit confusion tactics. Our analysis, published in the Journal of Consumer Finance, estimated that credit system manipulation was costing American consumers over $50 billion annually in the form of higher interest rates, denied credit access, and lost economic opportunities. The study found that manipulation tactics were particularly costly for young adults just beginning their credit histories, minority communities with limited access to sophisticated financial advice, and lower-income families who couldn't absorb the impact of credit score damage. But the economic costs were only part of the story. The psychological and social costs of credit system manipulation were harder to quantify, but potentially even more significant. Many clients described losing faith not just in the credit system, but in the broader premise that hard work and responsible behavior would be rewarded in American society. When people discovered that their careful financial management had been working against them, it undermined their trust in other institutions and systems. Dr. James Wilson, a sociologist at Georgetown University who studied the relationship between financial systems and social trust, collaborated with me on research into the broader social implications of credit system manipulation. "Dr. Chen," he explained during one of our research meetings, "what you've documented isn't just consumer fraud. It's a form of institutional betrayal that undermines social cohesion. When people follow the rules and still get punished, they lose faith in the legitimacy of the entire system." Our joint research found that consumers who had experienced credit system manipulation were less likely to trust other institutions, less likely to participate in community organizations, and more likely to report feeling alienated from mainstream economic life. These findings had disturbing implications for social stability and democratic participation. If significant portions of the population felt betrayed by fundamental economic institutions, the consequences could extend far beyond individual financial hardship. The research also revealed intergenerational effects of credit system manipulation. Parents who had been harmed by credit traps were less likely to encourage their children to engage with formal financial systems, potentially perpetuating cycles of financial exclusion. Maria Santos, my former client who had become a community advocate, shared this concern during a recent conversation about our Baltimore program. "Dr. Chen, I worry about my kids," she said. "I want them to understand how credit works so they don't go through what I went through. But I also don't want them to trust a system that I know is designed to take advantage of them. How do I teach them to be smart without making them cynical?" Maria's question captured the central dilemma facing anyone trying to help consumers navigate manipulative financial systems. How do you provide practical knowledge without undermining faith in institutions? How do you teach people to protect themselves without making them paranoid or disengaged? These concerns reinforced my conviction that individual education, while necessary, was insufficient. We needed systemic reform that would make the credit system worthy of the trust that society needed it to earn. As my research and advocacy work continued, I began receiving invitations to speak at conferences, universities, and policy forums about credit system reform. Each presentation was an opportunity to share our findings and build support for change, but also a reminder of how entrenched the current system had become. At a consumer finance conference in Chicago, I presented our research to an audience that included both consumer advocates and industry representatives. The reception was predictably mixed. Consumer advocates were energized by the documentation of practices they had long suspected but couldn't prove. Industry representatives were defensive, arguing that any changes to current practices would increase costs and reduce credit availability. "Dr. Chen," said a representative from a major credit card company during the question period, "your research seems to assume that companies are deliberately trying to harm consumers. Isn't it more likely that the phenomena you've documented are simply unintended consequences of complex systems?" "That might be a credible explanation," I replied, "if we hadn't found internal documents describing deliberate strategies to profit from consumer confusion about credit management. At some point, patterns of harm stop being accidents and start being business models." The exchange highlighted the fundamental disagreement about the nature of the problem. Industry representatives framed credit system manipulation as a series of unfortunate misunderstandings, while consumer advocates saw it as systematic exploitation. But regardless of intent, the impact on consumers was undeniable. Families were being harmed, economic opportunities were being restricted, and trust in financial institutions was being eroded. As public awareness of credit system manipulation grew, some companies began making voluntary changes to their practices. Several major credit card issuers announced initiatives to provide more transparent information about optimal payment timing and credit management strategies. These changes were welcome but limited in scope. Voluntary reforms could be reversed at any time, and companies that chose not to participate in reform efforts gained competitive advantages by continuing manipulative practices. More comprehensive change would require regulatory intervention, but progress on that front remained frustratingly slow. Despite congressional hearings, state investigations, and growing public pressure, the credit industry's lobbying power continued to block meaningful reform. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A data breach at one of the largest credit reporting agencies exposed not just consumer personal information, but internal communications about credit scoring practices and industry coordination. The leaked documents revealed extensive coordination between credit card companies and credit reporting agencies to maximize revenue from consumers caught in various credit traps. Email chains showed executives discussing strategies to optimize customer confusion and maximize profit extraction from responsible borrowers. Most damaging was a series of communications about deliberate algorithmic adjustments designed to penalize consumers who paid their balances in full each month. The documents showed that companies were aware these consumers posed lower default risks, but were deliberately scoring them as higher risk to justify reduced credit limits and higher fees. When these documents were published by a consortium of investigative journalists, the public reaction was immediate and furious. The revelation that companies were deliberately penalizing responsible financial behavior struck many as a fundamental betrayal of the social contract underlying the credit system. Congressional hearings were scheduled within days of the document release. Unlike previous hearings where industry executives had successfully deflected criticism with technical explanations and promises of voluntary reform, the leaked documents provided clear evidence of deliberate manipulation. Senator Warren used her time during the hearings to methodically walk through the documents, forcing industry executives to acknowledge that their companies had deliberately designed systems to confuse consumers and profit from that confusion. "Mr. Johnson," she said to the CEO of one of the largest credit card companies, "this email from your head of product development specifically discusses maximizing revenue extraction from customers who pay their balances in full. Can you explain to American families how deliberately harming responsible consumers serves any legitimate business purpose?" The executive's stammering response, claiming he wasn't familiar with the specific email despite it being sent by one of his direct reports, crystallized the industry's credibility problem. It became clear that voluntary reform efforts had been public relations exercises rather than genuine attempts to address problematic practices. Within weeks of the hearings, comprehensive credit reform legislation was introduced in both houses of Congress. The Credit Transparency and Consumer Protection Act included provisions requiring disclosure of credit reporting timing, standardization of reporting practices, and algorithmic accountability measures. But legislative progress remained uncertain. The credit industry mobilized an extensive lobbying campaign, arguing that reform would increase costs and reduce credit availability. They warned of economic disruption and claimed that existing consumer protections were adequate. Industry arguments were undermined by the growing number of consumer stories documenting harm from credit system manipulation. Families like the Rodriguez family, the Santos family, and hundreds of others who had been helped by our firm and similar organizations provided compelling evidence that current protections were inadequate. The debate over credit reform became a broader discussion about the role of financial institutions in American society. Were they supposed to serve consumers and the broader economy, or was their primary obligation to maximize shareholder profits regardless of the impact on customers? This philosophical question had practical implications for millions of American families whose economic opportunities were constrained by manipulative credit practices. The outcome of the reform debate would determine whether people like Jennifer Walsh, Michael Rodriguez, and Eleanor Fitzgerald would continue to be systematically disadvantaged for exhibiting responsible financial behavior. As I reflected on the years of research, advocacy, and client work that had led to this moment, I felt both hopeful and apprehensive. We had succeeded in exposing practices that had harmed millions of consumers, but translating that exposure into meaningful reform remained a challenge. The credit industry's resistance to change was understandable from a business perspective. The practices we were challenging generated billions in revenue annually. Companies wouldn't abandon profitable strategies without being forced to do so by regulation or competitive pressure. But the human cost of maintaining the status quo was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Every day that reform was delayed meant more families falling into credit traps, more economic opportunities being lost, and more erosion of trust in financial institutions. My work had evolved from helping individual clients understand and navigate credit systems to advocating for systematic changes that would make those systems more fair and transparent. But the individual stories remained at the heart of everything we were trying to accomplish. Jennifer Walsh had successfully rebuilt her credit and advanced in her career, but she remained an advocate for reform. "Dr. Chen," she said during a recent conversation, "I was lucky to find you and get help understanding what was happening to my credit. But there are millions of people out there who don't know these problems exist and can't afford the kind of help I received. We can't solve this one person at a time. We need to fix the system." Jennifer was right. Individual success stories, while gratifying, couldn't address the scale of the problem we had uncovered. Millions of Americans were being systematically disadvantaged by credit practices designed to prioritize industry profits over consumer welfare. The payment timing trap that had brought Jennifer, Michael, and Eleanor to my office was just one manifestation of a broader pattern of institutional manipulation that was undermining economic opportunity for responsible consumers across the country. As I prepared for another day of congressional testimony about credit reform legislation, I thought about all the families whose stories had informed our research and advocacy efforts. Their experiences had revealed the true cost of allowing financial institutions to profit from consumer confusion and manipulation. The path to meaningful reform remained uncertain, but the moral imperative for change had never been clearer. American families deserved a credit system that rewarded responsible behavior rather than penalizing it, that provided transparent information rather than deliberate confusion, and that served the broader economy rather than just industry shareholders. The payment habit that could kill your credit score wasn't the responsible behavior exhibited by consumers like Jennifer, Michael, and Eleanor. It was the industry habit of manipulating credit reporting and scoring practices to maximize profits at the expense of consumer welfare. Until that habit was broken through comprehensive reform, millions of American families would continue to suffer the consequences of a credit system that had forgotten its fundamental purpose: accurately assessing creditworthiness to facilitate beneficial lending relationships that supported economic growth and individual opportunity. The fight for credit reform was ultimately a fight for economic justice and the principle that hard work and responsible behavior should be rewarded, not punished, by the institutions that shape our financial lives. It was a fight worth having, no matter how powerful the opposing interests or how long the battle might take. As a credit expert who had witnessed the devastating impact of system manipulation on thousands of families, I remained committed to that fight until every American consumer could trust that doing the right thing financially would actually help rather than harm their economic future. The stakes were too high, and the human cost too great, to accept anything less than fundamental change